All right. Can everybody hear me? Jonathan, Lee?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Thank you guys for doing this today. Super excited to be here with you. I think we're here to talk about the DoorDash IPO, I believe. That's what we're here for, just joking. But it is a good day for commerce overall, right? Like, what a huge story. Talk about a pandemic lift. But thank you guys for coming. Lots to cover. Before we get into the meat of things, I just want to do some quick intros. Let me tell everyone about Foundation and myself quickly, and then turn it over to you guys, the more important folks in the room. So Jonathan, I've been here at Foundation for 7 years. I invest across most of the spaces, but primarily in the infrastructure and D2C and B2B and D2C, transactional platforms, marketplaces. Prior to that, I spent my life in commerce mostly, with a little hiatus to spend some time at Facebook where I headed up marketing. As an investor, there are, whoops, I'm gonna just fix this here. As an investor, you kind of live with good and bad decisions, and I'm fortunate here on this panel to have a bit of both. One bad decision I made very early was not investing in Lee, like a foolish, stupid investor. But it's been wonderful to see you build this incredible company. So maybe before we get started, you could spend a little bit on your background, how you came to be the founder of Havenly, and where the business is today, and then I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Great. Well, Jonathan, it's probably still too early to tell if it was
Definitely
a good decision or a bad decision. So, well, and I'm holding out hope here that I will be one of your biggest regrets. That's sort of my goal here.
You already are.
So I'm Lee Mayer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Havenly. Havenly is an online interior design service. We've been around for about 5 to 6 years. Met Jonathan probably 3 to 4 years ago as I was fundraising. And I think, my background is really not in commerce at all, oddly enough, or not even in interior design or home or really anything technology. I sort of came from a very standard New York City background, so sort of consulting, which is sort of the place where you learn how to do Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint decks. So I'm really good at both of those. Came about this business from really just a personal need. I really, really wanted to design my home, and no one was taking my money. And it was just like a very frustrating moment for me. And so that's kind of how I found this business. Started with a couple of people, and we've been scaling ever since.
How many folks on the team right now?
So we're almost at 100, I believe,
Wow.
on our corporate team, and then we obviously work with a few hundred contractors and designers.
That's awesome. Okay, we're going to get into more with you in a second, but I think your colleague in Denver, Jonathan, you guys know each other, I think, from the community. But Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind spending a little bit of time on your background, I've obviously had a chance to work with you now for a couple of years. But in your own words, how did you get started? A little bit on the company.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm Jonathan as well, Jonathan Smalley. I'm the founder and CEO at Jaguara. We're a connected operations and intelligence platform for e-commerce companies. And my background is in product. I started writing code in middle school, and like most high schoolers, fell in love with data and got into building what we call decision support tools inside of hospital systems, and was able to really see firsthand the impact and power that data could have on people's lives if applied properly. And then I started my first company, and we worked with an awful lot of kind of the first wave of digitally native brands, and got really excited about what the future of commerce could look like. And obviously amazing brands like Havenly taking that and just like totally changing the way that consumers can get access to goods and services. And so kind of those two things really early on inspired me to kind of build this platform that took all of this kind of siloed, distributed data and make it applicable and make it really actionable, so that, consumer companies can be really good at what matters, building great products and building great branded experiences where consumers can have access to quality goods. So quick overview of us, and like Jonathan said, very fortunate to work with Foundation and know him and the team here.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for joining. I have a few questions for you to get us started, but if folks in the audience want to go into the chat, fancy chat dialog box and post your questions, we're happy to take them as we go or at the end. Okay, so the story obviously of 2020 has been the pandemic, and it has had a dramatic impact on society. But I'm just curious, Lee, how has it impacted your business? And what do you think the long-term implications are for this year on your future?
Yeah, great question. I think the immediate impact is we're in the home category and everyone's at home and they're staring at their homes that maybe aren't fulfilling their dreams, and they can't get away from it, which has been pretty good for business, I have to say. I think a lot of people that have been putting off projects are now entering into projects. I myself have remodeled like 2 bathrooms that I didn't need to remodel, for example. And I think, on top of that, I think just, the way we're using our homes has shifted. And so people are thinking about their space differently and looking for some help to get it there. So for people, for example, that don't have separate spaces for the homeschool and the office and the many other things we're doing in our home right now, we're able to sort of be a provider of help and assistance to help them sort of figure out how to use the space. I think the second thing, and that's sort of the immediate, I think, trend that's been happening in 2020. I think the longer term trend and the thing that's a little bit stickier for us is just the general digitization of nearly every category. Mm-hmm. So the home category historically has actually been under-penetrated from an e-commerce perspective. Obviously, over the last couple of months, we've seen that change dramatically. And it's been kind of exciting to be on this tailwind because you can see that that's actually going to continue even beyond, these moments when we're sort of stuck at home.
Yeah. I'm curious. It's amazing that you've rode such a strong wave. Jonathan, how do you think this has impacted your ability for you to build a company and manage cultures? Are there any secrets or ideas or recipes that you've used to sort of keep everybody on the same path with this incredible distraction, particularly in the spring? How are you managing your culture in this climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to start with empathy. Obviously, this year has been really hard on everyone. Even, we're both Lee and myself are very fortunate to run businesses that have experienced growth because of this, and that's certainly not true for everyone. And then, even outside of that, on a personal level, it's doing well, and you're still, gainfully employed and all those things, just not being able to travel, not being able to see other people. So I think it all comes down to empathy and really listening to what's going on with the different members of your team, and just being willing to, I think, just like iteratively building a digital product, I think culture is built iteratively and built by great people. And so if you listen to your employees are kind of your end customer. So we spend an awful lot of time, testing things, seeing what works well, doing like Slack plugins that schedule random meetings so that you spend time with people, cross-functionally that you might not otherwise. And I think it all comes back to empathy and intention.
Do you think you guys are going to stay remote?
It's a good question. I think for us, I think the answer is probably both yes and no. I think, we've definitely seen in terms of like recruiting, everything for us has kind of always been about finding the right people. And so we've always been open to having a remote culture with kind of hubs in key cities for us being Denver and New York. And so I don't think that'll change, but I think we're big believers that, there's no replacing human interaction, and
for sure
to get some of that again once the vaccine's available.
Well, Lee, you mentioned earlier that the home category has just exploded, and there's been some incredibly strong emerging companies, obviously yours and Wayfair, but the one that obviously looms large in the mind of everybody who plays in the commerce space is Amazon. I'm just curious how you think about them. Do you think of them as a competitor? How would you help a sort of an entrepreneur think about Amazon if they compete in the same orbit or they see them in the rearview mirror?
Yeah, I think, look, if you're in the commerce space, Amazon is a thing. It's very hard to ignore, the 3,000-ton elephant in the room.
Yes.
And I think, I think the thing with Amazon though is what's nice about Amazon is they're pretty clear on what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And I think so when you think about Amazon, it's cost, assortment, logistics. And I think if you can figure out how to innovate on 3 things that aren't cost, assortment, large assortment, and logistics, you're probably in a good spot. I think a lot of e-commerce competitors to Amazon have actually really doubled down on the things that Amazon doesn't do well. So for us, for example, extreme bespoke personalization,
right, yes.
Right? That's not going to be their thing. Highly branded, curated assortments, not their thing. Luxury or higher priced products, not their thing. And in particular, what's interesting also about the logistical model is Amazon actually in the furniture space hasn't quite always been great at heavy bulky, which is really where furniture falls. So that's why you have companies like Wayfair,
right,
which are actually able to also compete on price and assortment, but potentially have a different lens on logistics that Amazon was sort of slower to get to. And that's why you sort of saw the rise of a real Amazon-like competitor in the home space. So figuring out like in the category where the white space is that they're not going to touch, I think is a very reasonable place to go, because, you know, frankly, we can't always shop on Amazon. In particular in categories like apparel and home, this is where discovery and aspirational intent really matter.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned a few of these emerging companies, Wayfair. The other company that's really taken off in the last 12 months has been Shopify. Talk about, I think they're at $120 billion market cap today, you know, several, you know, billions of dollars of GMV. Jonathan, you have a quite intimate knowledge of this company because they're a small investor in you. And I was curious, what is your take on them and their role in the ecosystem today? And how do you think they will adapt to folks seeing just how powerful this small operator, you know, bootstrap to $100 million revenue e-commerce merchant is emerging?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Shopify's growth has been really incredible, and I think it comes down to like their idea being lowering barrier to entry and kind of like arming the rebels to be able to do things. We have, I think, quite a broad thesis that the future of commerce, especially as you look at like younger generations becoming like a higher percentage of consumers, that and with barrier of entry lowering, you know, more than ever before, that there's, you know, you're going to have less and the Warby Parkers, the Glossiers of the world that are these multi-billion-dollar brands, and just way more of these kind of mid-market brands. And Shopify has been, you know, key to enabling all of those brands being able to get off the ground with, you know, super limited investment into things like technology. Lee can probably tell you firsthand, you know, even 10 years ago, what the cost of getting a commerce platform off the ground is. And Shopify has just lowered that barrier to entry in such a significant way, in a really impactful way that, again, allows people to spin up businesses in incredibly, you know, quick methods, and allows them to really focus on what matters, is providing those great experiences and great products to the end customer.
Well, I want to follow up on that, actually. Let's go there now. So in our world, Lee, replatforming is like a 4-letter word. Curious, how many times have you replatformed your commerce experience, and where are you today? Is it built in-house? Is it fully outsourced? Like, are you kind of where you want to be from a stack perspective, from a team perspective?
Are you ever where you want to be from an anything perspective?
No.
So I guess the best way to put it is I was our first developer. So at a minimum, we had to replatform.
You were the first developer.
I was our first developer. I built a fully custom e-commerce platform that our first.
No, just kind of like native code.
No, I was a PHP girl.
Okay.
So which kind of dates me a little bit. But yeah, I know. So anyway, so we had to replatform off of that because, as it turns out, I'm pretty terrible at it. And so we did our first replatforming in, you know, our first year of business when we hired our first sort of developers. And then ever since then, I've tried to avoid whole scale replatforming. I can't tell you how many times, though, we've gone to different parts of the code and moved it off of one framework to another or completely to a different stack. I think for us, you know, what we did wrong, and I sort of have thought about this a bit, is we tried to build everything in-house. So everything at Havenly is homegrown, including the e-commerce experience. And my whole point around e-commerce is it's really hard to innovate against e-commerce. There's sort of basic things that you need to fulfill. And there are lots of platforms out there, Shopify being one of the best examples, that you can use to really sort of power your business and then innovate in the ways that you need to innovate and let someone else run the other piece of things. So we actually are platforming our commerce experience, we think, over to Shopify. It's sort of a big initiative for us. But, you know, I think every single CTO, head of engineering or CTO we've had has like tried to move parts of the code over, and they've probably been right. But it is a tremendous transition for a business. Particularly, it's a bit like, you know, drinking really hot coffee while, you know, changing the tires on your car that's going 120 miles an hour. Totally. It's just like a kind of a hard experience, and I hate it.
Sure.
You know.
Hey, Jonathan, is this what you're seeing in your client base and your customer base? What does in your mind, the ideal stack kind of look like today, given the choices, as Lee said? You can do something completely homegrown. You can do something completely off the shelf. How do you think about it relative to where the size and stage of a company is? And like, what is your advice for folks trying to think through their stack?
Yeah, it's a good question, and obviously, like, there's no perfect answer, other than I think to have some type of system built out that allows you to use the best point solutions, regardless of what stage of business that you're in. I think if you look at some folks that we're close to, like Warby Parker and Glossier and things like that, have built these really bespoke experiences from scratch. It's really, I mean, incredibly painful, especially when, just like Havenly, just like those other businesses, you're doing real meaningful amounts of revenue, and having downtime for a significant period of time is really not a viable option. And so what we're seeing in the space, and this is like a little bit buzzwordy, but is this concept of headless e-commerce. The idea that everything that you do is API driven.
Yeah, explain that in more detail.
Yeah,
so it definitely is one of the major trends that folks are really thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think headlessness, when you look at, and this is like a little bit in the face of what we talked about earlier with Shopify, who's working on moving it from being a bit of a monolithic platform to exposing more things, having it be more API driven. But the idea here with headlessness is that everything can be API driven, so that your content management system, rather than being managed in kind of a bastardized, commerce platform, can be really managed through a point solution that's built for best in class content management, that your order management system is built for best-in-class order management, that can be multi-channel, that can be multinational. I think we're seeing, these secular trends as there are more brands doing more meaningful revenue earlier on in the life cycle, that there's a need to become multi-channel earlier on. There's a need to become multinational earlier on. And with all of those things, the complexity of the business increases really dramatically. So if you can approach a commerce stack in a headless manner, where each piece can connect to each other through APIs, it's not monolithic. It allows you to swap each of those things out as the business grows and becomes more sophisticated. And you might need to, move from whatever your V1 version of CX to something that's, again, more sophisticated and appropriate for the stage.
I see Lee nodding like this up and down. How many channels are you selling in today? So obviously have your core experience. How much of your core experience is through your .com? How many different points of connections do you have to customers for transactions today?
So we have a few. So we have .com and mobile and a mobile app, and so those are kind of the big components of the system. We have, as Jonathan said, sort of the legacy monolith, and we're trying to create a lot of different sort of extensions off of that. It's a bastardized, I think I used the word JS. It's sort of a bit of a bastardized system, but I do think for us, at a minimum, starting to create, so, we started to go towards more of a sort of RESTful API structure in 2018, still part of that process. But being able to do that has also helped us, squeeze off different parts of technology and rebuild those without sort of impacting the monolith. My favorite complaint from engineers is when they have to service the monolith. It is a bit of a beast on our end, and it's tough. And so, continuing the sort of process of moving off of that stack into something a little bit more flexible.
So Amresh, one of the folks in the audience, just asked the question of when you should think about building versus buying. And it sounds like from you guys, it's a little bit of both. But are there specific points in your life cycle when you should be building out more of your internal team? Lee, how do you think about that? And then I do want to get to data because I do think that's a massive question today. But first, how do you think about at what points do you start building internal resources around engineering and other parts of the tech team?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I wish I'd had more sophistication around answering this question before I built everything in-house and built up our team. I think that, again, the big thing, the thing that we get to is two things. Can we innovate? Does it make us different? And is owning it beneficial for the enterprise value of the business?
Right.
And if those two things are true, I will build. If those two things aren't true, and again, just basic e-commerce functionality is not something I'm going to innovate on, and no one gives a shit if I'm French. No one gives.
I expected myself to drop a few F-bombs. The fact that I lasted 21 minutes into this is a pretty big joke. So I'm sure
This is a record for us.
All right,
for
good.
sure.
I'm in good company.
Excellent. You're a very good company.
But no one cares if my shopping platform, my basic e-commerce platform is owned by me. It doesn't increase my enterprise value at all. And so I think that's a great example of where we really should be buying. But when we think about, so for example, we're building 3D technology and we're doing it specific to our use case around visualizing technology, visualizing our furniture in a customer space. Now that probably makes sense for me to own. It's a different use case. It makes a difference, I think, if we own it versus buy it. And so we're really sort of
core IP there.
Yeah, exactly.
There's definitely core IP there for sure.
Yeah.
How do you think about data? Do you have your own data team today?
We do have our own data team. Actually, a big part of what we're working on is using data to suggest, if you think about what we do, we're a personalization service in one specific vertical, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of what we're trying to build is the connections between people's preference and the products they're going to buy. And so we do have a data team. We're expanding it. We've never quite gotten the fit right. It's interesting. Data science is like a funny discipline in the sense that there are many flavors and sometimes you're ready and sometimes you're not. And so we're trying to get the right fit there, but it's our core technology really has always been this thought of data and using that to help make our design processes very efficient.
Hey, Jonathan, this is your world completely. This is the reason why you started your company. Many companies are swimming in all these different data sources today and yet lacking insight. At what point do you think, what would you counsel folks about how to think through a data stack? What kind of tooling should they enable? And then how should they organize their team? At what point do you think they should be bringing in-house talent or working with third parties?
I think the answer to that is really similar to like the answer that Lee gave around when do you buy versus when do you build. If there's something that's core to the IP of what you're doing, a recommendation engine internally that's tied to your technology, then that might lead you to like building an internal data team earlier on. In terms of business insight, I mean, I think particularly for e-commerce, and part of the reason why we started there as a vertical is because in some ways it's a very formulaic business. It's whether it's physical retail or it's a mobile application or a branded e-commerce experience. It's your total traffic plus who adds a cart plus who converts and what's the AOV of that, and then how many times should they repay it and what percentage returns. And so for us, we think that you've got to start there. I think we see an awful lot of folks who kind of do nothing and then they jump in kind of to like the deep end of data and they think that like the kind of the some cohorting thing that's going to tell them something magical. And when the truth, especially of a commerce business, is if you don't understand the baselines of these really core key metrics, then any of this really granular data doesn't do a hell of a lot for you. And so I think working with like several hundred e-commerce brands at this point, we always like very much encourage a crawl, walk, run approach to things where like first let's get nailed down what's the core of the business, and I think most importantly tying data back to what are we actually trying to achieve as a business. Are we purely in acquisition mode and that's all that matters, and if we're a subscription business then we can spend more on CAC, or if we're not and profitability matters and we're not well capitalized and we're more niche and so that CAC is going to start to become really expensive, how do we optimize around things like customer buying life cycles? How do we optimize around things like AOV, average time to churn and things of that nature? And so I think, again, Lee said it really eloquently on kind of buy versus build in terms of technology, very similar to data. What's key to your business and what's your key differentiator? And focus on understanding the core metrics around that and build the team as it relates to, building out like the core IP of your business.
Hey, Lee. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, no, I was going to tell you just an anecdotal sort of insight, data science. So we, at some point a couple years ago, we're like, we should be more smart about which products we sort of push to our customers. So we hired a very well-known, very established data scientist to sort of look through our data to kind of try and get us to a list of products that we should be pushing to our customers. And after 2 months and a lot of money, his insight was the cheapest stuff sells better. And I was like, well, I could have told you that for free. So slightly different perspective, right? We just weren't
definitely unsatisfying for sure. Question for you though. So then, if you could wave a magic wand today and add, one or two pieces of infrastructure or one or two bolt-on pieces of technology to your stack. Joe asked a question about automation and the supply chain and customer service and operations. If you could wave a magic wand and add anything to make your commerce stack and product better, what would it be? The other I've heard a ton about is attribution, but what would you be asking for, Santa Claus, as they say?
Yeah, attribution would be lovely. I do think, I think we definitely need a little bit more of a workflow tool. I think there's just like a lot of process that goes on in our in e-commerce businesses. We're dropship, so we don't have to deal with logistics, but in general, just how order flows go from customer to our team to fulfillment, particularly in the furniture space, is actually pretty complicated. And so finding something that can sort of bridge the gap between us and our vendors and our logistics providers. And that works. E-commerce is really great when it's UPS, USPS, and FedEx. When you get to freight, it actually is like a really big challenge. I couldn't tell you, so that's the thing. It's like, the unforced error rate in furniture is pretty high. And I think that's a real opportunity for someone out there.
Well, the OMS and workforce vendors in the panel now are all excited to talk to you. So on that note, what advice do you have for vendors? Because I'm sure there's many of them in the audience today that have a commerce tool or building commerce infrastructure. How do they get your attention? How do they sell to you? What matters to you when you're receiving a cold inbound outreach from someone like Jonathan?
Snacks? No, I'm just kidding. I think like, I think the big thing for me sometimes is trying to understand the use case in analogous sort of applications. So this, nothing gets my data, right? So, hey, Lee, at a comparable company that is non-competitive, so don't probably, we've done X and Y, and here are the results. It's pretty simple, right? I think the makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot of pain points in the e-commerce ecosystem. Not the least of that is on the sort of order management side, but also, again, I get a lot of cold calls from people that are thinking about marketing, and the challenge is, for the most part, it's hard to break through the noise. So, best way to do it, again, analogous application, actual results, and I'll probably listen.
Hey, Jonathan, any good insight there, man? So I hope you're taking notes because we can use all the advice we can get. But what does your organization look like on the go-to-market side? Is it inside sales team, outside sales team? How do you think about the channels that you're using and what's working best today?
Yeah, as the leader of the organization, being a product person, I think we've always taken the role of like, if we do product really well, then everything else can kind of fall into place behind that. And so for us, until earlier this year, we actually didn't have a sales team at all. Everything was referral, and it was mostly like leadership folks like me that taking inbound. And since then, we've grown out a pretty nice sized go-to-market team. For us, because we're highly integrated with dozens of platforms, we see channel partners as a huge value to us, and then have a combination largely inbound sales team as well as some BDRs that do an awful lot of what Lee just talked about. Because we're vertically focused, and we've seen a lot of these secular trends. I think one that's really interesting is similar to home goods, is food and bev, grocery store kind of being one of the last things to go, and seeing huge interest in a lot of our specifically beverage companies of people growing like subscription rate like 4,000% year over year, which is totally crazy. And so being able to just, I think, not only speak to outcomes that we've seen, but I think just be thought leaders in the space and provide people value when you do cold outreach. And that when you have something inbound, to be honest with people, I think that's one thing we try to do is if we can't solve your needs, just say that really directly, or if it's not the right time for us to work with you, to say that. And then we might get a chance down the road when feature XYZ gets rolled out, or, when your business becomes more digitally native versus, being traditionally brick and mortar. Those are things that we've done a lot of recently.
Very, very cool. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk to the act of company building versus the kind of company you're building. You're I think, Lee, you're a first-time founder.
I am a first-time founder, yes.
Are you a solo founder?
I was not a solo founder. I actually had my little sister join me at the beginning.
Excellent. And Jonathan, this is your second startup?
It is indeed. First venture back, which is very different.
So I was curious, what advice do you have for folks who are out there today about how to raise venture money? Early, when you're just getting started.
I don't know, Jonathan, you want to take? I feel like you've had a little bit more success than I did.
Oh, man.
I want to talk about that. You are now,
like,
so I don't want you to get off the hook that easy.
I mean, it's really fucking hard, right? Like raising money the first time is incredibly difficult. I think when I, moved from my first company, which is Bootstrap, to raising money for the first time, I was like, this is a good idea. We're smart people. Like this will be fine. And then very quickly you realize like it's like any other sales cycle, you're going to put a shit ton of people into the top of the funnel and a very small percentage at the bottom are going to fall out. And so this is like very typical, but the faster you can get to a no really is so much better. And just find people who believe the same shit that you do. And if you can find those people who believe the same thing you do, even if you're not at the right stage, you're not at the right sector, whatever it might be, surrounding yourself with people who inherently believe the same things as you about what you're building and how you're thinking about building it, it makes all the difference in the world. And it might take a really long time, but once you start finding those people, even if it still takes a little bit of time, the journey becomes significantly easier.
Yes, for sure. And Lee, I want to come back to you because there's a lot of lessons in that quick little, hey, easier, make it easier, and you laughed comment, particularly because for many e-commerce brands who are selling products, the fundraising process can be quite arduous. And so you've raised quite a bit of capital and from very good investors, and as a testament to your tenacity and awesomeness as an entrepreneur. What are the one or two things that you would, tell somebody just getting started about how to think about this journey that they're about to go on related to fundraising?
Yeah, I think the big thing and the mistake that I made is I took it really personally. I'm kind of a gold star gal. Like I like it when you give me the gold star, prior to this, I've chosen professions and schools in which I felt like, I could do something. And then it was, if I did that thing, I would get the gold star. And so what was interesting about fundraising is all of a sudden you start to get no's. And for me, that was actually a really interesting sort of psychological issue where I think I started to count in my seed round. I hit 140, I think, before I got like my first substantial yes. And
140 investors you talked to.
Meeting that resulted in a no.
Wow.
Which was, and think about that in any other context of your life. You ask 140 people out and they say no. You apply for 140 jobs and you get turned down. I think like for me, it was just a massive departure from what I think I was used to. What I started to realize though, and this is something that I think can really help, I think mentally as you think about fundraising, is there's actually an enjoyable piece of this. It's not, the no's are never fun, but the conversations with smart people thinking about your business in a different way is actually a really interesting intellectual exercise. I can't remember who said this. I saw this on Twitter. I think it might have been George Kurtz, but he was talking about how fundraising is a bit like coming into port, right? So you're sort of, normally you're off operating in the sea on your ship and that's all you're thinking about. And then you come into port once a year, once every other year, and you sort of like see the landscape, talk to your fellow captains, like all of that stuff. And I think that's actually, there's an enjoyable piece to it. And I think that was ultimately what kept me going in a lot of ways. Also that and just blatant stubbornness. And so I think it is, as Jonathan said, it's hard. It's hard, always hard. But I think, fundamentally there's some ways to get through it. And actually even nowadays, I find it pretty enjoyable. I get to meet some really interesting people.
It definitely is one of those things that you like build up calluses about. Yeah. It's like it's like any other exercise, or, you the first time you do it, you get really winded, and then you get into it for the second or third time. You're like, all right, I've done this before. I've got the calluses. It's not going to be as brutal.
It definitely.
I think those are very open.
Those don't hurt as much, for sure.
Totally, definitely open and honest answers. I appreciate the feedback. We have like 9 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you one last question. for each of you. And then also, if there's any other questions from the group, I know there's been a few that I've missed. I'm sorry. But if you could go back, 5 years or 10 years to when you started your company, and you could tell yourself one or two things about the journey you're about to go on, what advice would you give yourself about how to handle the future? Lee, why don't you start?
Okay. I think, my two biggest pieces of advice for myself would have been hire great people. Like, don't go for cheap. I think I went for cheap because you can measure money, but you can't measure talent as well. And so, you start to do this whole thing where you hire people that are too junior or not qualified or not really going to take you to the next level. And it's really the people that I somehow got who are incredibly talented that helped us move from point A to point B. So I think that's one. The second is, this isn't like a job. You can't quite quit it. You're sort of in it, and you're in it until you're not in it. And I don't know if I was fully prepared for that. And then also how much my identity becomes tied to sort of the company. And I think having a healthier perspective on what this meant in the early days would have been very, very helpful for me.
Very good. Jonathan, try and top that. What advice do you have for yourself, knowing what you know now about the journey?
I definitely can't top that. I definitely can't top that. I think Lee's first point of investing in the right people is a really, really important one, and probably the most important one. But as you've said that one already, I think kind of going along with that, invest in the right types of people, and the people that are I know often I think it's easy to invest in the things you feel that the business needs. But as a leader, especially if you're in this for a long haul, which this would probably go into my second point, is invest in the people that allow you to do the things that you're best at as often as possible. I'm good at approximately one thing. And when I have the time and space to do that, I'm really fucking good at it. And everything else, I'm at best mediocre. And we have certainly not always done the best job of resourcing, not only for myself, but resourcing for everyone across the team so that they can do the thing that they have a superpower in as often as possible, which I think obviously goes back to spending money on the right people. And then I think the other part of that is, as Lee said, we all get into this because we can't not do it. We're usually obsessed with the idea of what we're building. And to be able to give yourself, your family, and that goal that you're working towards itself, the highest priority, the best part of yourself, you have to take time to invest in mental health. I think particularly this year, that's probably particularly important.
For sure.
And something that Jonathan knows that I'm really bad at. And we talk about this person and a different leader and a different product thinker when I've gone for a run in the last 24 hours than when I haven't. And it takes 15 fucking minutes, and it is not going to change the outcome of anything. So I think take time to do the run, to read a book, to watch a shitty TV show, and you'll be better when you come back.
Well, I think the analogy is perfect. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And on that note, listen, Lee and Jonathan, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to spend time with us here. We're thrilled to have you. Lee, again, congrats on everything you've been through. You're going to write an incredible story, or tell an incredible story when you push that button at NASDAQ and you go public. And Jonathan, he's a few chapters behind you. So any advice you want to share with him privately will be definitely helpful for us. We have a couple of other things just for the folks in the room coming up. We have our final keynote of the day where my partner Ashu is talking to executives from Microsoft and PayPal, particularly around what's happening with COVID. But lots of good stuff today. Thank you everyone for coming. And Lee and Jonathan, again, can't thank you enough for making time. Angela, as you as well. We'll talk to everyone soon. Stay safe and healthy. Bye, guys.